So, yeah, Photoshop, right? File open. Gonna grab this drawing. So again, I don't know, is anyone actually following along, or in terms of like step by step? Okay, well, you want to start by opening up this drawing. So again, file open. Now, some things to be aware of in Photoshop. If you go to like file new, and again, I don't know what everyone's level is, so I'm gonna just try and catch all the basics. You want to pay attention to this thing called resolution, okay? And for this project, you want this to be at least 200. Sometimes this defaults to 72, which is what is typical for a screen or for like an internet image. The resolution here states it clearly. It's the number of pixels in a square inch. So if you have 72 pixels in a square inch, the image has less memory to it. It's kind of like the computer has to remember less things. It only has to remember 72 things as opposed to 200 things. So it makes the image file size smaller, which is good for like a web page. When you're printing though, if you only have 72 pixels in a square inch, it's going to look really blocky. It's going to look pixelated. So a good rule of thumb for print media, 200 is like pushing it. When I was in school, and more common rule of thumb is 300 is safe for printing. If you're doing like high-end photography, they're like 600. So just be sure to catch that. I will take off points if any of your stuff is pixelated. So if I go here, if I go image size, you can see here it's 200 dpi. So this is the raw scan of my drawing. You can see I'm really high up on the page here. You can see my scanner at home is embarrassingly dirty with like marks on it and stuff. You want to be able to clean all that stuff up. Just based on what we're looking at, you have the toolbar on the left here. These are kind of the different tools to use. These up here are selection tools. If you click on these, you will see more options. I believe this defaults to this lasso tool. If you click on this, you'll get the polygonal lasso tool, which I use a lot. So again, if you're following along, this is how I would clean this object up. I would first select the polygonal lasso tool, and I would just start clicking around the object. Left mouse click. Again, I'm on a PC, and I'm assuming a lot of you have Macs, so I apologize if there's some differences. But what I'm doing is like I'm selecting around the objects to get rid of like all of these dots out here. And you'll notice here I kind of trimmed a little bit too close. You can always add to your selection by holding Shift. I believe it's the same on a Mac. I'm not entirely sure. And you can always complete your selection anywhere by holding Control. And you'll notice like that little plus by the lasso turns into a circle. I think it's Command on a Mac. And basically there we just added this extra selection. Another useful selection tool is the magic wand tool. This will snap to lines. You can change the tolerance at the top here. I'm trying to remember now. Low tolerance means it's very picky. So if it's set to 1, it will get like very bumpy. It'll be very, I don't know what word to use. If you set it to 100, it's like it's more forgiving. It'll select more of a range, so to speak. Typically like 50 or 10 is a good setting. But what I'm going to do now is like I'm going to hold down Alt, which subtracts from a selection, and click on the outside here. And what it's going to do, it's going to take all of this like rough selection. It's going to snap it to my line work. So again, it's just to the outside. I'm holding down Alt and clicking in here, and you can see it all just snapped to my line work. And now what happens if I go Edit, Copy, and Edit, Paste, I can now turn off all of that messiness that's behind it. So all of these dots now, by selecting around my object and deselecting the negative space to the outside of it, I now have essentially just the line work. Okay, so that's how you might start. Something I glossed over in Photoshop, the way that Photoshop works, and again, everyone has different levels, but the main key of Photoshop is this area over here, which is the layer system. You can think of it as like a stack of pages. I always do this mistake. To drag this up so I don't accidentally click on my recording here. You can think of it as like a stack of pages, right? So by creating new layers, you can see it's adding new layers here. If I take my brush tool, it's like, oh no, I ruined my object. It's only on this layer, right? So you can turn things on and off and then delete them. So that's what I did here. I copied my line work and pasted it on top of the other one. So now it's cleaner. If I want a white background, I can create a new layer here. I can grab the paint bucket tool, make sure it's pure white. The dotted checkerboard that you're seeing behind here represents a transparency. That's how Photoshop shows transparency. So if I'm on this, you want to make sure you're on the right layer. So here I'm on layer 2, which is underneath this one, and I want to fill it with a bunch of white space. I can take my paint bucket tool and drop that on there. Okay, the reason we split this up is now that this is on its own layer, we can now move this around and orient it how we want. So naturally through human error, this is at a slight angle. If I go to Edit, Transform, and Scale, it brings up this box. A quicker way to do that is Control-T or Command-T. And you'll notice it brings up these boxes around here. This is how you can start to like rotate your object and stuff or scale it. Let's say your object's too wide. That's how you can make it smaller, okay? But if you set it up by tracing the object, hopefully you don't have that issue. I'm using this right now to just reorient my object, tilt it just a bit so that it looks a little bit more horizontal. And when I'm happy with that, I hit Enter. Now you guys can't see it up here. It's more evident on my screen, but the whiteness on the inside of the object is a little bit darker than the background around it. A useful tool is Image Adjustment Levels. And you want to make sure you're on your object here. And I'll try and show you guys here. I'll try and exaggerate this. So if I drag this all the way here, you can see that there's still some white page in there. And again, I see it on my screen. You can't see it on the projection. This is like a very fancy way to really dial in contrast, okay? So a very simple way to use this tool is to look at these droppers here on the right, grab the one that looks white, and anything that's the page from your scan is just click on that, and that will make it pure white in Photoshop. So that's the best way to use that tool. It just like auto settings, you don't need to worry about it. So now, I mean, again, unfortunately, the contrast on the projection is a little bit different than on my screen. You'll notice, actually, if I bring that back up, you can get it also by doing Control-L. Look at these lines here. You see how faded they are? If I take this white portion and drag it to the left, do you see how those lines disappear the further to the left I get? So that's a way to take out smudges and stuff. That's another thing you can do. You'll notice, though, that if I go too far, like it kind of blows out my object. If you drag the left line, like basically I'm turning the contrast up, and that's how I'm getting rid of kind of some of those light lines in there. So that's one way to clean up your work. I realize this is incredibly quick, guys. I'm sorry, there's not more time. But essentially, the takeaway is levels are useful for like photoshopping out smudges by tweaking the contrast. And again, I think the simplest way to use it is to use the sample, the white sample, and click on any page area. I mean, to give you maybe another example of this, you can always copy a layer by holding down Alt and dragging it, or just saying, I think, Edit. I'm sorry, I don't know where it is. Duplicate, maybe. But now here we can see this page. If I go, if I'm on this layer and I do bring up levels with Control-L, or again, I think on a Mac it's Command-L, and I click on the white, like maybe I click on the white dropper on one of these dots, that's another quick way to get rid of stuff. It's not as precise, though. I would encourage you to approach it the same way I approached it. Okay. Any questions on anything so far? Again, I realize it's quick. I'll throw this on YouTube so you guys can have this as reference later. So that's how you clean up your drawing and arrange it. Now I'm going to talk about how to modify the drawing, and again, hopefully make your life easier for the 6-view orthographic. Some of my navigation tools that I always forget to mention, I hold down spacebar to drag my work area around. I hold down Control and spacebar, or I think on the Mac it's Command and spacebar to bring up the zoom in, and then you hold down Alt and you can zoom out. And again, that's all on the hotkey page I gave you guys for navigation. Okay, so that's cleanup and navigation. So now let's talk about how to actually use Photoshop to make your life easier in terms of your orthographic. So again, here, these are the selection tools. We were using polygonal lasso tool. You can use that again if you wanted. It might be useful here to like chop out these lines that I use for reference. Again, I don't mind if you guys have lines in your orthographics. Just try to keep them neat. And again, holding control to complete that. So now that I have this, when you have, I've heard these referred to as marching ants. When you have these ants marching, it means that's your selection currently. You want to make sure you're on the correct layer. And here I'm just going to do a simple edit, copy, edit, paste. And now you'll notice I have the left view again. And now for most of you that have symmetric objects, if you take this, you can go edit, transform, flip horizontal, because we're flipping it left to right. Boom, now I have my right view. I don't have to redraw that. You want to just try and visually align the bottom here. And now here's another trick. You want to hold down Shift when you drag things. By holding down Shift, it locks it. By dragging it left to right, holding down Shift keeps its vertical orientation. Right? I'm moving. You can see I'm moving my mouse up and down, but that view is not going up and down. It's only going left to right, and that's because I'm holding down Shift. Now you visually kind of want to match the gap here to the gap here to keep that about even. So that's how you can copy that view. Here's another good trick. If you have a symmetric object like this, you'll notice, because I'm a human and I make mistakes, this is not perfectly symmetrical. What we can do here is I can select half of this object, hopefully the half that I think looks better. So this is a different selection tool. It's called the rectangular marquee tool. You just click and drag. Again, you want to make sure you're on the right layer. Currently, I'm on this layer here. You always want to look back and make sure you're on the main layer that has all the images. Here, I'm going to do the same thing, edit, copy, edit, paste. You can see I'm only selecting half of this, so Control-C, Control-V. And then same thing, edit, transform, flip horizontal. And now by aligning this, now my object is perfectly symmetrical because I flipped it over. So that's another trick you guys can do. For the savvy people, that means you could get away, in theory, by drawing half of both of these views and then flipping them. I would still encourage drawing the full both because then you can pick the better one. All right, now to just try and wrap this up in 4 minutes. Little things like this. Again, you want to make sure you're on the right layer. You can grab the eraser tool and just kind of knock this line away. Another way to do that. Another main Photoshop thing is the history. It's up here. It shows you all the commands you did up to certain points. So you can, like, let's say you made a mistake, you can go back. Unfortunately with Photoshop, Control-Z only jumps between, here, let me make an obvious thing. Control-Z does undo, redo, undo, redo. To go further back, you have to do Control-Alt-Z. And you'll notice, like, you see how it's marching up on the, I'm pointing at my screen as if you guys can see my finger back here. It's marching up on the history. So, side tangent there, it was as I was erasing this line. And I wanted to roll back to show you guys another way to get rid of lines, a more clean way to do that. Again, is with this polygonal lasso tool. And then just hitting, making sure you're on the correct layer and hitting delete on there. All right. Let's say you make this other half view here. One way to work in Photoshop is you can always duplicate layers. It's a way of saving them. So again, here I just took this main layer and just copied it in case I need to come back. And the reasoning for that is now I just want to take this layer and merge it with the one below that, so that now I have a clean symmetric view. I can now use this for my bottom view. So if I select both layers, which I do by holding down Shift and clicking on both of them, I can right click and say merge layers. Now same thing, I can select this, Control-C, Control-V. You'll notice I'm not doing the magic wand deselect. That's because I already cleaned up my selection in my first step. So once you do that once, you don't have to do it again. And now here on the bottom view, you can go edit, transform, and flip vertical. Now the difference though on this bottom view, again, this is when I would want to look at my objects. And notice on my bottom view, I have this line here, and I don't see the circle at the top. So it might be a good idea on this bottom view to just take the outline. And again, this is where I would use the polygonal lasso tool. This is where it's a bit of a pain in the rear end to like select around here. You could do this with an eraser tool if you wanted. So again, just like any program or anything in class, anything in life, there's a million different ways to do it. You want to pick what works for you. So I selected that out. When I got the marching ants, I just hit delete. And again, this is a shortcut to an end goal. It's not gonna get me all the way there. Again, I can try and arrange this a little bit so that it's kind of in the middle. The reason that I said it's a shortcut to an end goal is I'm going to have to print this out, and I'm going to have to complete the line work with the details. And now I misaligned this. And now last but not least, I'm just going to take this middle view and do it again. Again, always make sure you're on the right layer for whatever you're editing. Polygonal lasso tool to get the middle view, Control-C, Control-V to copy paste. This becomes the back view. Again, holding Shift to keep that alignment. And now again, if I look at the back view of my object, it's slightly different than what I see on the front. To set myself up for success, I'm just going to keep the outline and print this out and draw in the missing details. So again, I'm selecting, this is my preferred tool. Again, if you prefer to use the eraser, you can. And then delete. And now my 6-view orthographic is ready to be completed. It's not too much work to come in here and, draw in the missing details. Does that all make sense to you guys? For me, the full scale makes sense. You can always select multiple layers and hit Control-T and like resize it so it fits. It is okay, to set your view up this way. Again, I'm thinking of like Corey's object. He has a long lighter. It would make sense, Corey, for your long view to be in this orientation, for example, so that it fits better to the page. Yeah, anyway, for what it's worth. Cool. Any questions on that?